Hey Robo-Buddies. So I went through a reading kick this past week where I read 4.5 books in 3 days, which was well over 1,000 pages. And one of the books that I read during that time was called The Maze Runner by James Dasher. I've heard that if you like the Hunger Games, you will absolutely love the Maze Runner series, so I had some awesome expectations going into this book. Basically, it's about this guy, and he wakes up in this black box, and the only thing he knows is that his name is Thomas. He doesn't know how he got there, he doesn't know where he's from, he doesn't have any sort of memories from his past, but he knows what certain things are. He knows that he's in a box, and he knows that once the box starts moving, it's an elevator, but he doesn't have any sort of memories associated with elevators. So once this box opens after about a half an hour, he enters onto this courtyard kind of thing, where he's surrounded by about 50 to 60 other guys who are around his age, between 12 to probably about 18. They don't really tell him a lot of what's going on. They're just like, meh, you'll snap out of it in a couple of days, because this guy, he's completely and totally scared. He's like, where am I? How did I get here? Are these kids good? Are they bad? Why are they staring at me? Why are they saying these things to me? So, I mean, he's thoroughly confused. So he's introduced to this kid named Chuck, who's about 12, and he shows him around the place a little bit and explains a little bit about what's going on. But this kid, Thomas, still doesn't really have a whole lot of information about who he is or why he's there. He was told that he's probably about 16, but that's basically all he knows. So he discovers during his time here that there's this thing called the maze, and there are people who run throughout the maze, and they're called the maze runners, and their job is to try to find an exit from this area that they're seemingly held captive inside of. But the problem is they can't find a way out because the maze changes. Not to mention the fact that you can't stay in the maze at night because there are these scary creature things called the grievers, which are basically like a mix between like a cow and a robot, and it has like these things where his arms and legs should be, which are like saws, and I mean they have each arm or leg has this different weapon that could be used against you. So if you are stung by this griever thing, you go into this state of like shock, you're gonna die, unless you get this special kind of medicine. And if you are stung by a griever, it's essentially worse than being dead. You'd rather just be dead by a griever than go through this thing called the changing once you get this serum. And the changing is an extremely painful process where your veins are like sticking out and you turn green and you're having hallucinations and you're screaming and you're throwing up, and it's a just dreadful, horrible, nightmarish process. The people who have gone through the changing are really, really suspicious of this kid Thomas. They're like, I've seen you before, I've seen you, you're evil. And Thomas is like, how do you know who I am? I don't even know who I am. So Thomas is introduced a little bit more to how the society runs. Each kid has a special kind of job to help the society run smoothly. There's like farming, and there's cleaning, and there's cooking, and Thomas actually goes through these different jobs to try to figure out which one he's best suited for, but he knows that he wants to be a maze runner. That is what he feels like he's called to do. So as the walls are closing for the nighttime, where the grievers will start to roam throughout the maze, there are some of the runners who are slowly exiting the maze. One of them has been hurt, and Thomas has to make a choice. He's like, do I go and save those runners who obviously won't make it in time for the walls to close, or do I let them stay there overnight knowing that they're going to die by these grievers? And even though he's not allowed to enter the maze since he's not a maze runner, he chooses to anyway. And everyone's like, you're as good as dead, because I mean, once those walls close, you're trapped in the maze overnight with the grievers who are going to kill you no matter what. So Thomas has to save this one guy who's dying, escape from the grievers, try to survive overnight, and he does. And the people in the glade are like, whoa, who is this guy? He's the first guy who has ever survived in the maze. This is insane that he was able to do this. So after that happens, there's actually another delivery. And what happens is once a week, supplies are delivered to the glade to help them cook and clean and run smoothly this whole society of 12 to 18-year-olds. And then once a month, a new person is delivered to the glade. It's always a boy, and it's always once a month on the same day. Well, they discover that the next day, another person is delivered, which is really bizarre because that's never happened before. And this next person is actually a girl. This is the first girl who has ever entered this society, and people are freaking out because they're like, it's a girl, she's dead, what is this? And she has a note that says, this is the last one. And she wakes up from this death that people think that she's in, and she's like, everything is going to change. And then she falls back down and she's in a coma. And people are like, what is going on? Why is this girl here? They grow really suspicious of Thomas because it's like, ever since you got here, you know, first first you survive in the maze, and then this girl shows up, and they're like, what is going on? You're out to kill us all, and of course the people who have went through the changing are really suspicious of him also. So Thomas actually becomes a maze runner, and working with him and the other maze runners, they try to discover an exit from the maze. And they discover this thing called the cliff, which is actually where they push the bad people off of in the maze. So anybody who hurts society, they either leave them in the maze or push them off of the cliff. And they discover that they can do that with the grievers. It takes a lot of work and it's really, really scary, but they discover that that's what the cliff is. That seems to be the only exit from the maze. And they discover that if you throw something just right, it just magically disappears. It doesn't hit the bottom of this cliff. It just goes into this weird invisible vortex thing. And so that seems to be the only escape, but people are afraid to go through that because then you're in like the grievers, lair, and that's essentially walking into death. Everything is going to change holds true. Eventually the walls at night to the maze don't close, and the grievers escape and start to terrorize the glade where all the people are at, and they take one person from the glade each night until they pass this weird sort of test. And we discover, spoiler alert, that they're actually placed inside of this maze for a reason. It's like some sort of experiment that's going on with them. And this girl whose name is Teresa and the guy whose name is Thomas, they're talking to each other through their minds and they're discovering what's going on, and Thomas actually goes and gets stung by a griever so that he can have the changing and learn new memories, and he learns that they're all orphans and they were all going through these tests because they're very intelligent. They're each named after a specific scientist. So Thomas is named after Thomas Edison, and Teresa, I'm assuming, might be named after Mother Teresa, even though she wasn't a scientist. What's happening is, in the outside world, there's this thing called the flare, which is like really, really, really bad. It makes you go crazy, and you don't want to be hit by the flare because there's no cure for it. And so these kids were placed here as a test to try to experiment and see if there is some sort of way to escape the flare. And so these kids are escaping this maze, escaping this test, and walking into a world that is worse than the maze. It's a very phenomenal book concept-wise. I've discovered recently that I absolutely adore dystopian young adult fiction, but I've realized that I like dystopian young adult fiction if the lead character is a female. If there's a female protagonist, I like it so much more, but I kind of struggled throughout this book because the lead character is a guy, and I couldn't really relate to him as well. I didn't really feel like I don't know, I just didn't feel like I was inside of the story. I kind of felt like I was an outsider looking in. I'm hoping that the second and the third book get better. I'm wanting to read them definitely to see what happens next. So I want to know, have you guys read this book? And if so, what did you think about it? And if you guys have any other recommendations for books for me to read, definitely leave that in the comment below as well, because I am a reading buff and read constantly. So thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you soon. Ciao. So I went through this weeding? Ugh. Apparently I like to garden. Okay.